a choice right now, between fear and love. It's just a ride.
Out of the dark night of ignorance and into the shining light of truth.
Expounding reality.
A population of citizens capable of critical thinking.
We don't see things as they are, we see them as we are.
There's a level of reality where everything dissolves into an ocean of energy.
We empower our experience by insisting on our authenticity.
That's very profound. Very.
Expanding reality.
Welcome to Expanding Reality. I am your host, Brandon Thomas. On this episode, guys, we have Matt Terrillion coming by from the Great Deception podcast. He breaks down the World's Fairs, star forts, ties it into vibrational frequency. It's incredible. Now, for the audio-only audience, he does an entire presentation, guys, with over 150 slides of images of star forts and the World's Fair. So I highly recommend you guys check out the link in the show notes titled expandingrealitypodcast.com. That's going to take you to where you can watch the video presentation of this conversation for free. Just go check it out over there. Linked down in the show notes, as well as all the ways, of course, to find Matt and his amazing show, The Great Deception Podcast. Highly recommend it. Also down there is going to be our affiliate link. So Food Forest Abundance, get your freedom from fear on. Libsyn, if you'd like to start your own podcast, as well as if you're going to buy any damn thing at all through Amazon, run it through our link, linked in the show notes. It helps the show. So also, if you'd like to expand your experience with us here, go ahead and do it at that link. That's where everything's at. It's a central hub for everything. Expandingrealitypodcast.com. Links to Rokfin for the premium stuff, as well as you can become an expansive insider on there for some extra stuff. And all of our lives are replayed there. Everything's linked up there. Merch, socials, all of the good stuff. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, guys, let's get to this incredible episode. Y'all are really going to love this. The whimsy flows with Matt Terrillion. All right, Matt Terrillion hanging out with us on the show. We are extremely excited. We're going to get into some World's Fairs. We are going to get into some star forts, some alternative history. This is one of my favorite subjects. We haven't covered it super extensively because I was waiting on you, brother. You were the guy that I wanted to get on here. So for my audience that doesn't know you too well, just introduce yourself if you don't mind, sir.
Yeah, I'm Matt from the Great Deception podcast. I'm relatively new to this. I started my podcast last September, so about 30 or so episodes in. But I've really developed an affinity for the old world, and especially the World's Fairs, star forts, crystal palaces. All this stuff from the old regime really sparks my interest.
Dude, it is so cool. It is so fascinating. I cannot wait. Like I said, been a fan of your show, man, for a long time. I've been listening just since you've been out, and we run in the same circles anyway, Alt Media United. And so I'm super pumped about this, man. This is going to be great. I've heard a lot of your episodes, a lot of your presentations. So, dude, let's get to it, man. Where would you like to start?
Why don't we start with the World's Fairs? Let me get there. That's the wrong one.
It's okay. While you're pulling this up, I'm going to let the audio-only audience know that Matt has prepared an incredible presentation for us. So check the show notes for the title of expandingrealitypodcast.com. The video will be for free over there, guys. So just go check it, sign up if you feel fancy, and check this thing out. So just a heads up for the audio-only audience.
Are we good? Can you see my screen?
You are beautiful, and you look great, man. These are cool. I love it.
Excellent. So basically what I have here is the World's Fair started in the early 1850s, 1851 to be exact, in London. And if you listen to Michelle Gibson at all, she will say this was the fair to kick off the new era, the Industrial Revolution era, okay, the Industrial Age. And so one of the things that I like to follow that she did is just give you an idea of what an exposition is. And so by definition, exposition is a text that presents one side of the issue. The purpose is to persuade the reader or listener by presenting one side of an argument, that is, a case for or against. So when we think about these things, they were called expositions. And when you think about that, this is basically, if you go by this definition, it says it's only going to present you one side of the argument to persuade you. And that's really what I think these things are about. Now we'll look at the other, which ties in as well. The other definition would be a large exhibit, usually sponsored by a government or trade group, to showcase the products and services of a particular company, region, or country. So that nails it too, because that's what these were. They were privately funded for the most part. They got some government funding, but they're mainly privately funded by the same people. And what's fascinating about them, and Brandon, if you know anybody, any of these guys that are big into money, they don't like losing money.
No.
Right? Yeah. So we get into these World's Fairs, and one of the problems is we start seeing them lose money over and over again. So here's some questions I want you just to really think about as we go into these things. Remember, we're in the 1850s, early 1900s. How did they build so fast? Where did all the materials come from? How did the materials get to the site? Where's the blueprints for the buildings? There was no machines, no trucks, little electricity, no electrical tools at the time that we know of. Horse and carriage and trains were your main modes of transportation, so we're told. Think about how many workers it would take. Who's going to feed all these workers? Where's all the restrooms, the plumbing? Where are they going to sleep? Okay. And then we get into it. Why are there so few construction photos? If this is such a marvel, and you actually had people at the Chicago World Fair that would sit and watch the construction. Not many pictures though. So why? It's just kind of strange. With everything else is photographed. All of the electrical work, supposedly underground. How did they build all these foundations? Right? Foundations don't go down that quickly. Why would so many fairs lose money, yet they kept bringing them back over and over? And they're still going on to this day. The latest one was in Dubai, and it's called the 2020, but I believe it took place in 2021. So they still continue to this day. Where did all the visitors come from, and how did they all get there? Now, one of the things is mostly they're going to tell you by train, right? Okay, so we look at all these different fairs, expositions, so to speak. And some of the cities are kind of interesting. New York is obvious, right? Philly is kind of obvious. Then you get into like Louisville. New Orleans is a bigger city. Cincinnati. Chicago is I consider the mother of all World's Fairs, and we'll get into that one. San Francisco had one in 1894. Now, remember, the gold rush was the 1850s. So San Francisco's only been around about 44 years, and they're going to have a World's Fair already. Very interesting. Atlanta, Nashville. And one of the things, if you're watching this presentation here, this Parthenon right here, built to replica scale, is from Nashville. That's the Parthenon. And that's supposedly built for the exposition. You have Omaha, Nebraska, which is a very interesting site as well. You get into Charleston, South Carolina, St. Louis, which is another monster World Fair. I mean, it's the biggest by far, over 1,200 acres. Then you go out west, Portland, Oregon. You get into Jamestown. Then Seattle and San Diego were smaller fairs. And then the largest after the fact is the 1915 San Francisco Fair, which, remember, is just less than a decade following the Great Earthquake, where the city was essentially leveled, we're told. Mm-hmm. So there's the fairs. Now let's get into some of the interesting thing. One of the interesting quotes I found when looking at this is they said, "Everyone about us moved softly and spoke gently. No one seemed hurried or impatient. All were under a spell that held us from opening of the fair until its close." And this quote has stuck with me since, because if you think about, word magic and all that stuff, these people to be under a spell, it's very fascinating when you think about it.
It is. It's kind of like the fluoride stare, that everybody get, that just complete disconnect.
And that's what you see if you watch the videos. Anyone that hasn't seen any, watch some of the videos of the people moving around. There's no chaos. They're just kind of wandering, aimlessly. There's no destination. There's no hurry. It's a very bizarre scene, almost something like they were placed there and we're just seeing this stuff for the first time, which, if you think about it, though, many of them were. Many of them would come from, supposedly, the story is, small towns across the US and across Europe to come see this. And then you're going to land in, this, for example, is the Great Crystal Palace in London from 1851. Now, this is a very interesting fair because, like Michelle says, this is the kickoff. So if we look at this structure here, this is the Crystal Palace, and it was built on 18 acres, okay, almost 1 million square feet in 1851. And basically, it displays the example of the technology developed during the Industrial Revolution. Okay, it was 1,800 feet long. So if you're thinking about the 1,851 feet long, it had over 3,300 columns, 10 million feet of glass, and 600,000 cubic feet of timber. And on top of that, they built it in 6 to 9 months. None of that makes any sense. 10 million feet of glass in 1851. Okay, now, so we believe that. You look at the interior of it, it's decorated lavishly. Right? It's not something that was thrown together. This is 6 months, supposedly. They were able to build the structure and fill everything in there. A little bit longer, maybe 2-3 months to fill everything. All the sculptures, they had trees that they built around. So it's just an amazing building. And to just see this fountain here is supposedly a crystal fountain as well. That is in existence today somewhere. I don't remember exactly where, but they have relocated it several times. But here's the interesting thing about this 1 million square foot building. Supposedly, after the fair, they just took it down and relocated it over in Sydenham, which is, a stone's throw away in London. So we're starting to see this pattern of things being built for the fair and then destroyed. So let me give you a look here at this slide. This slide kind of gives you an idea of some of the different fairs. Now, the top one is Chicago of 1893. The bottom left is Buffalo in 1901. We have St. Louis, Missouri in the upper right-hand corner. And then we have Omaha, Nebraska. And you just look at this and it doesn't look like this is America in the 1800s, early 1900s. Okay. It's just, I'm blown away because the Chicago one looks like ancient Rome. Here's some more examples. Does this look like architecture that we would find in just everyday America? But no, they would build it for the fairs and put up these extravagant buildings. And what's interesting is you start seeing them in different locations, very similar buildings. Now, am I saying that, they didn't build these? Well, some of them, yeah, I do think they built, but not some of these larger structures. I mean, some of these are just unbelievable. We're looking at some different fairgrounds and you're seeing it all over. I mean, what you see are these enormous sites where they take over, most of the time it's over hundreds of acres. Okay. The smallest one was in New Orleans and that was, it was like under 250 acres. So, I mean, we're talking about large areas that they are supposedly just building all this stuff, and these fairs go up in 2 to 2.5 years on average. Okay. And that's why I said, remember those questions I asked in the beginning as we look at these pictures, because I mean, they're telling us that these arches are built of staff and wood, and that all these intricate statues are not real, that they're just temporary. And what we find at these fairs is that amongst the hundreds at times of structures they build, only 1 or 2 survive. And that's another very interesting point about all these fairs is why do you go through all the trouble to make all this beautiful construction, this ornate design, only to have it destroyed at the end of the fair, whether intentionally by demolition or, by fires? And this is a common theme we'll see throughout the fairs. So we look at New York in 1853. They tried to mimic the London Crystal Palace, and they developed a Crystal Palace of their own. Now it was smaller in scale, but it still covered 4 acres of land, which at the time it was one of the bigger structures. And this is another thing that you see when you do the research into it. Every fair has the biggest structure in the world at the time built for that fair.
Right.
So this at the time was one of the biggest in America at the time. Again, much like the Crystal Palace in London, was supposedly made of a iron frame with glass panels. And then we look inside. And one of the quotes I found interesting from New York was, "There will be gathered here the choicest of products of luxury of the old world and the most cunning devices of ingenuity of the new." So they're basically kind of telling you right there that, listen, you had a great thing going in the old world, but welcome to the industrial age. And we're just going to con as much as we can. It's like the conning age.
The Great Deception.
And that's what we got. So another interesting thing is a 310-foot observatory they built. It's a wooden tower that you could see like Queens and I think all the way into Jersey from this. So that was another really just cool structure they built, all within this same time frame. And then of course there was an unfortunate fire that burned the entire Crystal Palace to the ground. And this is a theme, like I said, we'll see over and over again. Now, Philly is a very interesting one. This was to commemorate 1776, obviously. I mean, look at this building right here. This is the main building. I mean, we're talking acres of space. It was like 21, 22 acres this building covered. I mean, they say it's of the Moorish design as well. It has a lot of Moorish qualities to it, with the spires and the windows. And it doesn't look like this was just built, just for the fair.
Yeah.
So Philly, here's an interesting one. Supposedly they had 10 million in attendance for the fair. The US population was only 45 million at the time. And Philly's population was only between about, say, 700,000 to be safe. Okay. So, I mean, the population numbers are just staggering. So they normally have about 700,000 people in town, but they were able to bring in 10 million over 6 months and accommodate them with no issues. Interesting. Okay?
Yeah. Cause I mean, what sort of like city infrastructure would they have to do to accommodate for 10 million visitors? If they spent all of their time and energy building up the fair, I mean, were they out building extra hotels and stuff like that and restaurants?
Yeah, it's not like you had extra hotels. I mean, they did have, there were people that would obviously, had like B&Bs, so to speak. They would have people in their home during these things and try to make some money off it. But yeah, I can't find it in Philly that they would have the amount of, accommodations to be able to handle these people. I know in Chicago, for example, they did build a lot of hotels around that time. But again, when we start looking at the numbers, it seems illogical. But another interesting thing I thought, so we're talking 1876, they had 10 million people. In 2018, Disney World, which was the highest attendance park for 6 months, only got 10.5 million. So, think of the scale of this in 1876, guys, and the size of it, right? The expo was almost 3 times bigger than Disney, and it only took about 22 months to build. Disney took 18 months. Okay, so if you did the math, they not only did they do bigger, they did it infinitely faster.
Yeah, and they had all the equipment. Yeah.
And so you look at the Philly and like, whoa, 22 months in 1870, in 1971, it was just about the same time. And you built something that's 3 times bigger than what we built. I mean, here's the layout of Philly. And if you look on the right-hand side over here, you'll see these two very large buildings. I mean, those are just, they're massive. One was, they're like 800 feet long. It's just, and they built all this in 22 months, mind you. So yeah, that's the main building. Again, just an enormous structure. We look at the agricultural hall, and you'll see the same types of halls over and over as we go through the different fairs, you know, and the one that survived is Memorial Hall, and that is still there today. And that's the one that survived. The rest of them were destroyed. And that's what we're left with. So then we move to New Orleans. This is an interesting one just because at the time, to see where New Orleans is and what they put up, and, you know, how New Orleans ties to the Moorish claims, that this may have been, this was one of the things you'll also see at these fairs is there's a very racist theme to them. Very white dominant, you know, pushing the superiority and inferiority of minorities. And that's what you see with New Orleans. They said this is going to be one of the biggest tools to allow the blacks to show their progress since the Civil War. And now, mind you, what they did with some of these fairs is they had human zoos where they put these people in like cages and stuff. So it's, you know, there's a very interesting contrast. Now, here's one, again, we talk about construction times. If we look here, started in March, a 33-acre building, and they finished in September. You know, just about 6 months. That's it.
33 acres, huh? That's interesting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And there's usually a building that does sit on 33 acres at these. So if anyone's into numerology or and knows any brotherhoods that are into the number 33, that's interesting. And I just want to give you an idea of what we're dealing with at this time, the contrast in styles, right? We have, and the one on the left is at the fair where you have a stand selling lemonade in the background, and this man is plowing the field with horse and carriage, but you have this elaborate building in the background. It doesn't
jive. It doesn't match up conceptually.
It doesn't fit. So, you know, we look at these fairs and this one's interesting too. The organ, you're going to see that too. A couple different organs. St. Louis had one that was supposedly the biggest one that was built in the world at the time. And then the company went bankrupt after supplying it for the World Fair. So just little interesting things like this that we see, and the architecture. I mean, guys, if you're into it, just go take a look at some of these World Fair buildings, because there's some what they call Greco-Roman. There's Roman, there's old Renaissance, you'll see Moorish influence. There's all of this worldwide feel to it. And what's interesting, I'm only showing you the American fairs, but as we get into it, as you get into it and start looking international at the fairs, you're going to see the same architecture, the same building types that are all over the world. I mean, this is New Orleans right here. This looks like Spain, right? This looks like some Spanish architecture. And, you know, at the same time, look, we have a Roman influence here with the Roman columns at the hall, the former city hall of New Orleans. So there's really no rhyme or reason to it. You get a little bit of everything, red bricks and everything in between. Mm-hmm. So this is by far my favorite and the most interesting World Fair. And this is the 1893 Chicago Exposition. It was called the Great White Expo. Okay, it was open for 6 months, 700 acres. Okay, now think about that. 690 acres. It was swampland. And they built 200 buildings on it in less than 2 years. And when you see some of these buildings, guys, they're not like, you know, the Walmart they throw up in your local strip mall. These are massive, massive buildings. And they also built the world's largest Ferris wheel. It was about 264 feet. was doing square feet with my son yesterday in math, so I got that in my head. But the interesting thing about the Ferris wheel is that they end up breaking it down at the end of the fair and shipping it down to the St. Louis World Fair. Very similar to what they did with the Crystal Palace back in London. Now, what's mind-boggling about Chicago, okay, at the time, Chicago had about 1 million people. They drew 27.3 million people in a little over 5-6 month time span.
Jeez.
And so it cost them about 30 million to make, and they made a profit. This is one of the few fairs that did make a profit. And they made about $3 million, supposedly. So, and what I found, and I found this later in my research, was they supposedly used about 40,000 workers. Now, doing the numbers, it just does not add up. Now, again, what happened 22 years prior? The Great Chicago Fire, which supposedly leveled a lot of the city, 200 million in damage, which at the time, which would be 3.7 billion now, destroyed 18,000 buildings. How many buildings could they really have at that time? So think about this. And then 20 years later, this is what, this is the devastation of the fire. And then we're going to 20 years later have this, all of this. Now, here's an interesting connection. Anybody that likes to draw connections, the director of the Chicago World's Expo is none other than Abram M. Rothschild.
There
so
it is.
That name might interest you a little bit for anyone that knows anything about it. Now, another thing I found interesting is this arch here that we find at the Chicago Expo. It has Columbus in the middle. But then if we look over on the side, these are all Roman goddesses. Okay. And these are the same Roman goddesses that we see in the apotheosis of Washington on the ceiling of the Capitol. So a lot of symbolism in these fairs. Okay. For those of you that don't believe it and think we're exaggerating, look into it. And I'll leave that for you there. But here are some of the construction photos that we have been provided. Okay. You're given an outside structure. You can't really see what's underneath it. Or you're given middle of a swampland and there's just a bunch of boards, planks that they've drilled in. You see some framing. And again, I'm not saying that none of these buildings were built. I do believe that they built a bunch of buildings for these fairs. But at the same time, if you hook up here with the tools that they're using to clear the land at the time, how are they going to get us to, here, for those watching, here's the Chicago World Fair over here, which was held in Jackson Park. Okay, this is the outside of it. You could fit Magic Kingdom and Epcot inside of it and still have the whole Midway, and you'll understand the Midway in a minute, free.
Jeez. It's massive.
Think about the size. Okay. That's 700 acres. And they did this in 2 years. Okay. And we're starting to look at some of the buildings, the manufacturer's building, 30 acres, the machinery building, 18 acres, transportation building, 16. Okay. So we're not talking about small structures. Now look at the detail. Okay. Let alone the number. Right. For the Chicago World Fair, they supposedly built, about 200 buildings, between buildings for these, what they considered the 14 great buildings, which some of them we're looking at right here in the Court of Honor. But then each state of the United States at the time had their own building. A lot of nations from around the world, over 30 or 40 nations around the world would have their own buildings. But if you look at this, man, it screams ancient Rome. Right. And that's what we're seeing is almost the passing of the torch from Rome to the new Rome, which is going to be America. And we're going to see Roman symbolism throughout. Columbia is one of them. She is, the golden lady it was 65 feet tall. And supposedly she was made of all gold, whether it was gold leaf or solid gold. You'll get differing opinions. Now, what's interesting about it is supposedly at the end of the fair, they lit her on fire and burned her down. And it was almost like a symbolic ritual.
Yeah, like Bohemian Grove or something.
Yeah. Yeah. See, I mean, you look at these, and again, I'll just call this out. You look at the peristyle, it's 600 feet long, 60 feet wide, 60 feet high. You know, you see the numerology there, the 666s, you know, they're just, it's, you know, I drawn at straws, but at the same time, they love their numbers. They love their symbols.
Yes, I do.
But just look at the detail here of this touched up photo. I mean, it's just breathtaking to think about it. And again, they have 14 great buildings. All right. Out of the 200, there's 14 that are just amazing. And we'll run through them real quick. The manufacturer's building is a mammoth. It was the biggest building at the time for this fair. It could hold upwards of 300,000 people. In this picture right here, you're looking at about 100,000 at the opening ceremony. But this building, so think about that. That's 3 college football stadiums full of that could fit inside this one building. I mean, that's one of the buildings. You're looking at this machinery hall. And remember, guys, this was all built on swampland. Okay. I mean, the buildings are just, if these are built of wood and staff and stucco, I'm blown away, because this is the greatest forgery ever known to man. Okay. And here's where we get into the human zoos. Chicago was big for it. And it's basically where they would take different, they called them human beings, exotic human beings, but it's just different cultures. And they would put them in little zoos and show you how they lived on a daily basis. I mean, talk about the most racist and degrading thing you could do to people.
That's gross.
But this was
so gross.
This was their thing. Then we get into infantoriums. Okay, they had baby incubators at these fairs where they would have live babies on display, and these supposed incubators that were able to keep premature babies alive. And the first ones were displayed at the Chicago exhibition, which that gets us into a whole nother thing. If you want to look into babies and orphan trains and orphanages and all that stuff, I mean, it's amazing. So here's the Chicago, the Ferris wheel. All right. It's amazing because it held over 2,000 people at a time. It had 36 cars that held 60 people each. They started doing weddings on it. And then, of course, after the St. Louis fair, they blew it up with dynamite. Why would we keep it? Why would we keep it going? They just decided to blow it up. All sorts of cool things at the Chicago Fair, movable sidewalk. Then you had the H.H. Holmes, who's supposedly one of the greatest serial killers ever. And actually, they are doing a show that's going to be coming out soon, The Devil in the White City with Keanu Reeves, on this topic. So I'm interested to see how they portray the World's Fair and this. So anyone that's interested, be on the lookout for that. The final thing about Chicago, really, other than the way it ended, is on the third to last day, the mayor of Chicago was murdered. So they cut the fair short, by a couple days, and kind of instead of having a big ceremonial ending, it kind of ended abruptly. Now, this idea of the assassination or murder, this isn't the only fair it happens at. In 1901 in Buffalo, actually, President McKinley is assassinated at the fair. And there's a lot of symbolism in that one. So here with Chicago, one of the things, and I'm going to try and be quick with this because I want to get to some of the other stuff, but these guys are talking about how the fair is going to end before it ends. And he says, indeed, it is the ambition of all concerned to have it swept away in the same manner in which it appeared, and with the utmost dispatch. For economy, as well as for obvious reasons, it has been proposed that the most glorious way would be to blow up the buildings with dynamite. Another scheme is to destroy them with fire. The last would be easiest and the grandest spectacle, except for the danger of flying embers in the event of the change of wind from the lake. This is Charles McKim, one of the creators of the fair. All right. And I mean, so they're talking about having this thing, just sending it out in a blaze of glory. And it does. There's 3 large fairs. There was one fire during the fair, and then 3 large fires after the fair that destroy it. One in 1894 in January takes out the Court of Honor. One in July takes out the 7 of the great buildings. I mean, and this is what you have left. I mean, you look at some of the photos and it doesn't look like a normal fire. There is just utter devastation. And then the closing ritual where they supposedly lit the Statue of Columbia on fire and burnt her down. So, and again, here's what we're left with from the fair. Out of all those amazing buildings, the only one that's still there is the Palace of Fine Arts, which is the Chicago Museum of History, I believe, or Art History. And then you have the Congress building is still there too, which is the Art Institute. But then the other two were moved off-site. That's the Norway Pavilion and the main pavilion. So we're going to run through these next couple fairs relatively quickly just to show you the things, because I would like to touch on some star forts here real quick. But you got to see, Nashville is called the Athens of the South. It had a pyramid. It had Parthenon. I mean, you look at the design of these things, guys, and it doesn't look real. Or it doesn't look like they could make it fake. It looks so real. And this one, Parthenon, was built to scale. Here's them supposedly building it. It looks like they're modifying, renovating it. It looks like it's already intact.
It does, yeah.
The pyramid, very symbolic, right? On multiple levels. Memphis ties to Egypt, right? And there's a lot of talk about this area tying to Egypt and all along the Mississippi. And again, you just look at some of the architecture and the size of these buildings that were just supposedly built and then they're destroyed, you know, and we look at Omaha, Nebraska in 1898. Like, this is not what I pictured Omaha, Nebraska looking like in 1898. And it's like a grand city in the middle of nowhere. And that's one of the things, you know, you start thinking about these expos and were these old great cities, right? That they just found dead or uncovered. And were these at one time in American history great cities of old? You find electricity in all these, which is amazing at the time, because it's not common until the late 1800s, early 1900s that you start seeing it in cities and in some rural areas. But I mean, we just look at these buildings and it's just one after the other. They're just beautiful. They're monsters. And then we look here at the picture and what do you see? A bunch of white gentlemen in suits with their hands in their pocket. Okay, guys, if you know your symbolism, you're going to start seeing over and over that these aren't just fairs. These were indoctrination camps. These were to tell you what to think and how to think about things. This was CNN and Fox News before they were available. This was a re-education of the people of the time, a lot of which may not have been Americans, but were brought here to become Americans. And this is how they were brought into it. And this is where you get these numbers. So we look at Buffalo. Buffalo is a fascinating one because I never heard of it until about 5 years ago. And you think about Buffalo, New York, and, you know, that's not really a place. But then you look at this, and this is 1901. Buffalo's lit up like New York City. Just a beautiful, beautiful sight. And McKinley is shot at the end, and supposedly it's all destroyed. And they tried to save the electric tower, the city did, and they couldn't raise the money in time, so they destroyed it. It's like, guys, and you have to think at this time, right? They couldn't find anything better to do with these buildings than just destroy them. It just doesn't make sense to me. We're looking at this Go ahead, Brandon.
Oh, I was going to say, it makes sense if you look at it the way you and I do. It doesn't make sense. The official story doesn't make sense at all.
No. If you are trying to present, like we said in that quote before, they're showing you all the luxury of the old world, right? All of that. We had all this architecture. There was probably free energy. You know, people lived healthier. They used cathedrals as healing centers. And then we're going to give you the industrial age where we start bringing in oil and pharmaceuticals and, you know, and we were creating workers. And, you know, it's almost like a reset in a sense.
Yep.
And here's another one that's just fascinating is St. Louis, 1,272 acres they built. A couple of these buildings today are on the campus of Washington University and still exist. But I mean, you look at this, look at the size. I mean, you look at some of these people, they're little ants, and these buildings are just massive structures that we built for 6 months just to put them up and tear them down. And St. Louis had over 1,200 buildings they built for this fair. So, or, 1,200 buildings at the fair.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, what do we see? You see kind of an obelisk, right? Always got to have the phallic symbol at every fair. You can't go anywhere without it. Here's some kind of construction photos. You see some steel framing going up. You see some stuff in some buildings already up in the backgrounds. So, you got to kind of make do with what you can here, but it doesn't look like a huge construction site that you would expect bustling with people and horse and carriage and supplies. There's just not much. It's almost like a dead site.
Yeah, it is. Like they found it like that and then just decided to continue.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like this is how it was left for them. Okay. How do we finish it? And that's where I think, okay, yeah, they did have to use wood and stucco because they didn't understand how to build like this. And then afterwards they're like, oh shit, we got to try and keep this up. We're not going to be able to keep this facade up that we know how to maintain these buildings. We got to get rid of them.
This happens in wall construction in Mesoamerican countries as well. They do this with they'll find like old Inca or Aztec, and then the wall construction is incredible, and then the newer construction that was built just on top of it, kind of like what they did at Baalbek or any of these other places where they take existing structures and then build what they're capable of doing, which was nothing like what was before them, and they just slap it on top. And that's how they know that it was built differently, because the knowledge wasn't there.
Yes. Yeah, and that's what we're finding. You see the different tiers. I went to Belize, and that was one of the things I saw there was you saw the different eras where there was one level of building, and then the next was a totally different building. Didn't match whatsoever. It was just placed on top.
Yeah, it's odd. And so this model is prevalent throughout history. So why wouldn't it have happened in this case as well?
Yeah. Oh, I agree. Yeah, and one of the interesting things I found is they can't go without throwing a little propaganda in your face. You get some dinosaur skeletons at the exhibits and everything. So no chance is missed on their part. But I mean, that's the World's Fairs in a nutshell. Okay. I mean, we can keep looking. San Fran, I'll give you a quick look at that. That's another one. Again, 9 years after the Great Fire, earthquake. And again, we see in the symbolism in the artwork, but we just look at the grounds. I mean, they did all this. It's just an amazing site. The buildings are beautiful. The landscaping was beautiful. They had arches and supposedly the only thing that lasts is the Palace of Fine Arts. And, it's a crime what they've done. You look at all these beautiful buildings, and the Bill Graham Civic Auditorium also survived from this time. That's the only other building from the fair to survive. And most of them met the unfortunate demise, whether intentional or quote unquote accidental by fire. All right, let me see. Let me show you a little star forts to change track. You have anything else on that, Brandon?
Dude, I mean, you're incredible at this information. Yes, there's so much to cover. You did a phenomenal job. So first of all, thank you. And second of all, guys, linked in the show notes is all the ways to find him and his show. Go check it out. He goes into such great detail. And this is just amazing. So that's all I wanted to say is thank you for this. This is awesome.
Yeah, no. And this is kind of a crash course, guys. I've done multiple episodes on all these topics. So like Brandon said, you can come over to my page and check them out. And I have some YouTube videos up. You can go check those out too, where I dive into these presentations. But what we're going to do here is a quick overview of some star forts. For those of you who may or may not have heard of them, they're found throughout the world. Okay. And what they are structures that they have very geometric patterns to them. And this map here just kind of shows that they're everywhere. It kind of shows some castles with it. And there's just structures all over the world. Europe is heavy in them, but don't be fooled. North America has a lot. South America has a lot. You find them all over the world. Now, do they tie in with ley lines? That's one of the questions that everyone's asking. Are they part of the old natural earth grid, right? That where our buildings worked with the ether and as a network, not only for free energy, healing, possibly frequency transmissions, multiple, the sky's the limit when it comes to possibilities. But as we look at these forts, what we're going to start seeing is similar in different parts of the world. The one on the left is in Denmark. The one on the right is in Japan. But look at the design. Guys, if you're telling me they're going to go through all this effort, this intricate design just for a defensive structure, and that's what we're told. We're told that these are, and an interesting term they use to describe them are batteries. Think about it that way. Think about the multiple meanings of the word battery. Okay. The star forts first appeared in like the late 1500s. Probably 15th, 16th century, I should say. There's no real idea of how many exist today because they're still being uncovered via Google Maps to this day. There's, anywhere between 5 and 10,000, I would say, in over 60 countries around the world. One of the interesting things is if you're going to get into the story of it, supposedly Michelangelo had his design in some of the original ones for Florence back in the 16th century. But I don't know, you hear these names get thrown around and sometimes it's just for clout, right?
Yep.
But what we'll do is very rarely, now I say here, there are no two stars that are exactly the same. Usually you do not find these structures are identical. Every one is relatively different. They vary in size, shape, scope, height, even the pattern with inside the building. But what you'll see is there's usually water present, or there was water present at the time before it was diverted away from these structures. Because that's one of the things you'll see too, if you do any research, and some great people to look at are autodidactic. They do great work on star forts. Michelle Gibson's done some great work on star forts as well. John Levy's looked at them, but autodidactic really drills into them from the Google Earth perspective. And you'll see where they cut the water line, which essentially seems like it cut the lifeline away from the star fort. Because if you know anything about cymatics, the water is a very important element in it. It's conductive and it takes shape. It has takes the shape of different frequencies. So it's almost like this structure needed that water around it, not only for, quote unquote defensive purposes, but it also needed it there for the energy.
Yeah, because you think of piezoelectricity with like what they do with the pyramids, or what they say one of the ideas about the pyramids is with that those currents underneath and with the building materials themselves. And limestone has little bits of quartz. It's very conductive. And so with the right materials, with also a current, that piezoelectricity occurs. That's why they have those, and you know this, I'm just for the audience. That's why they have those little crystals in watch batteries. You just shake them, which creates a kinetic charge, which keeps the battery running. So this is one of the reasons why when Matt, you mentioned water found at these locations and cutting off their supply, then yeah, that could be physically how they operated.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things about these, and I don't know if it's this one right here, but as we get into it, what you'll find is usually there was more star fort below ground than there is above ground. So that's another interesting part of the whole scenario, is that there were many layers to it as well. So it wasn't just as simple as it being what you see on the surface level. There were tunnels underneath, there were different layers to it. And I'll show you some up here in a second. But basically, why were they created? Well, their predecessor was the castle, right? It just had these big vertical walls, which if you are into the story of the cannon fire and everything like that, they were a lot easier to destroy as they were just, vertical. Now, what they did with the star forts is they started making them on an angle. And so as you'll see on the outside, you have the angled walls that would receive the cannon fire a lot easier. Now, I mean, you're just looking at some of these designs, and I don't know. I mean, it's just for a defensive purpose. It seems very interesting, but they just, what they did is they would make the walls thicker, okay, and shorter. But since they were angled, they were much harder to penetrate and do any damage. The cost, they weren't cheap, right? But it took a lot of people to do them. You had to have some sort of knowledge of not only masonry, but also of engineering, of design, say some math background, because this is heavy geometry in here, and sacred geometry, if anybody's into what Randall Carlson talks about. Because we start looking at these, and there's many different types, and supposedly why they did the star fort is to prevent dead zones, okay, as the enemy's attacking. When you had the rounded tip, you had these dead zones where you couldn't fire down on with a sharp point. Now you are funneling your opponent in certain directions. So I don't know how much I put into it. Here's just a list if you're ever interested. These are the different parts of a star fort. They have names. There's all sorts of different types, but you'll see on this is all a slope that would be sloping down away, and then you'd have your bastion and your defensive purposes up top. But we look, and I mean, these things are breathtaking, and they're all over the world. We're looking at Portugal over here on the left. We're looking at Spanish over here on the right, and then we're looking at India down here on the bottom. And they're all these intricate star designs. And you'll notice in the Spanish one up top, it's almost like the top has been cut off. So what likely happened was there was land there, and it has now become overwhelmed by the water. And you'll see that from time to time as well in these. The polygon, that's not really interesting. Let me get to the different types. So there's multiple different types. I didn't even realize that. So you got a 4-point, a 5-point. They call them the long finny, the Star City, the hedgehog. Okay. And there's all these different, and I'll show you some examples. That's amazing. But what I said before is approximately 50% of the star fort structure is underground. Different tunnels, mazes, a lot of it, the story goes, it was for storing ammunition, for gunpowder. It was a better area to keep dry. And I don't know, I'm still digging into that because I'm not buying it.
Pun intended. Well, do you think that the foundation sort of could have settled like what we find in San Francisco, and another kind of nod to the Tartaria is that there was some sort of liquefaction or some sort of mud flood action? Could it be that those maybe were originally above ground or designed to be, or there weren't as many things below ground and it could have happened as a result of this alleged mud flood?
That's where I would lead. That was where my beliefs lead to, because I find it hard to believe that back then we had the ability to dig that deep in the water too, mind you. So you're going to have to find a way to not only stop the water around you, but then build down and then let the water come back in and hope that it doesn't get into your building. I have a feeling the structure was there. Some sort of liquefaction or, mud flood type event happened, or sea level rises. And now all of a sudden that building is now partially submerged.
Could be a nod to the cataclysm that happened, whatever that was, whatever abandoned those, hundreds of thousands of kids, right?
Yeah. Yeah, the orphans, right? I mean, in the 1800s, when we're looking at, a couple million people in the world and we're dealing with it, it's like, where did they come from? Where'd all the parents go? There wasn't that much war. But at the same time, what are we seeing? We're seeing insane asylums pop up. So those who didn't take the message well at the World's Fairs, well, we got another little space for you. We'll send you to this little camp away from home, and you can relearn. And when you're ready, we'll let you back out.
Yeah, if we let you back out.
And which usually never happened.
No, that's a great point, Matt.
Yeah. So, and that's why I have a tough time with these, because these are along the same lines. Everything that you read is military, military, military. There's no other purpose for these forts other than military. So we start looking at them though, and yeah, they do have some significant military presence or purpose, right? It is a very good defensive structure. But are you going to go through all of this just for that little area? It doesn't add up. All that work. Now, here's an interesting one. Look at CERN and look at this star fort. They kind of have an eerie resemblance of an overhead view. And that's what we're kind of thinking. We think electric, we think energy with these things. And that's, I haven't been able to prove anything, and I doubt I will, but, I'm going to keep digging on it, because the more we look into these different forts and the shapes, and I'm kind of whipping through these right here, but I want to get to, because there's many parts. These field systems are amazing that are around the outside. What I wanted to get you to is the just the cymatics and the let's see.
These are amazing. These are such cool
it's just,
pictures.
And like I said, check out my video. All these are in there, and I go into much more detail. I even go into the regions, the different ones. Here's in the 1850s, U.S. built 91 star forts, supposedly, in America alone. Now, if you think about it, if you know anything about American star forts, one of them is Fort Jefferson, which is down in the Florida Keys. And Fort Jefferson required about 16 million bricks to build. So where we came up with 16 million, who's making them, getting them down there, and we're building it out in the middle of the ocean, it's a feat, to say the least. But just to tie that in, what I kind of feel that these star forts tie into is like our aura, like a magnetic field, right? And the human body has it. And I feel like you start looking at the study of cymatics, right? Which is, shows geometric shapes based on frequencies or vibrations. Well, if you look at these are all done through an oscillator. They resemble a star fort almost to a T.
Yeah, it's like that's how they got the design for it.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you know anything about Dr. Emoto's study with water and the way that frequency affects water, that's, you tie the water in with the building. Now, if the building is the base, right, for your frequency, and then you're going to have the water be the transmitter. Well, now we're talking, we're getting onto something here. And is this the one that works? Yeah. This little video right here, you'll just see the different patterns as it plays out. And it looks like any of the forts. At any time you could hit pause and that could be a fort, right? I mean, pause.
What looks
that
like
could be one of the fort.
Looks like they've used all of these.
Yeah.
That's another thing. Were you able to corroborate or match up maybe the frequency and pattern with the star forts that are in existence, and maybe match them based on frequency that they would have put out?
That is on my to-do list. I have a list of star forts, and I want to see what their layout ties to from a frequency, and see what kind of connection there is there, because I think you're onto something, Brandon.
I think
for sure.
Well, it sounds like you're already there too, just same brain here with this, but it seems like also that it'd be interesting if you could then maybe see what the resonant frequency of that would have looked like in that area in conjunction with the distance from another one, or any structures around or anything like that. Even elevation may play into the design of the star fort based on the vibration. Oh yeah. Yeah. There are so many different variables in this that, this is going to be a long dig. And this is, one of the things that you get into one area here and it sends you on different rabbit holes, because there's so many layers to it. And it ties into so many things that you can't wrap this up in an hour, right? You can't wrap these things up, because as you get into this hour, well, now here, like you said, Brendan, well, now how do these tie to the actual frequencies? Let's see how it goes to real life. And that's where I think a lot of the research is going now. And just by people knowing that they're out there, now they can say, okay, well, why? And start seeing, because it's like the churches, like with the different rose windows. Each window had a different pattern, and it is believed that pattern would influence the frequency that would be radiated from that building. It's fascinating. I mean, and what's interesting too about this is the similar, and beyond all of this, which I think you're very much onto something here with the shape, the design, and tying it to cymatics. Absolutely brilliant, Matt. But I think also that you see a lot of this where this really points to a global civilization, not an isolated, one culture did this and then another culture did this. That's what's also interesting about all the buildings that when we talk about the World's Fairs and Tartaria, these building techniques, and you can see this from Peru all the way over to Cambodia, where they have the three windows, the towers look the same, the hieroglyphs look the same. They, worship the similar deities holding the same bag. The pine cone is very important. And this type of iconography is spread out across the world, just like these star forts are. So I think, and I'm right here with you, and really the thing that you and I are both talking about is maybe we don't know exactly what's going on, but we know what's not going on, which is the official story here.
Yeah. Yeah. And they tried to even say, when you go back to the Chicago World Fair, they tried to, again, they love narratives. They had 33 Italians come over to break ground for the first, for the opening of the fair. And again, you get into the numerology, you get into the Roman connection, and that's what we're starting to see here is you're absolutely right. We have to start disproving the narrative, right? Just I can't prove anything, but what I can show you is what is not right and what doesn't make sense. And that's one of the things I've gotten from Howdy Mikoski lately. He's been on a couple different podcasts and said it lately, is that we can't be out there trying to prove the truth. We have to disprove the lies.
Yes.
And that can be done. We can't prove anything, but we can disprove a lot.
Oh God, we do it with NASA all the time. Hey, why do you have a green screen? Why did things fall when they're supposed to be in gravity? How'd you get through the Van Allen radiation belts all that time ago? But then now they're telling us that they can't wait to solve that problem to get through them. Like, there's so many things, and it's like, okay, this is where the concept of like flat Earth and stuff comes up. This is where these ideas come from, because you can't trust official sources. And what you then ask yourself, just like our history, is, okay, well, if this is not true, then what is true? Or even just kind of like, okay, well, we only know what's not true. And then you just kind of go away from that. So it's one of these things, man. It's an inversion of reality. And really, yes, when you can dial in your discernment to that, that's where questions like this come in. That's why I love your research, man, because you just point out all the dumb shit. You're like, hang on, this was the official story. How's that sound to you? And it sounds fucking dumb. So I love the research that you do on this, and your work and your pointed direction is what's so damn fascinating with this, brother. It's just awesome. So I can't wait to see what you come up with the star forts, though, man. That's amazing. I love that you're tying it to vibration.
Yeah, and that's when it got me, because at first I was like, okay, these are cool buildings, but when I started seeing all these videos and how things work these days, it's amazing, because I just started working on the star fort work, and then all these cymatic videos started popping up, and I was like, oh my gosh, there's like a sync here. It's meant to be. And I put the two and two together, and I was like, oh, that when I watched the cymatic, I mean, those are all star fort patterns. And so, there's cool little videos like even this one here, where you start, again, it's just about frequency and vibration. And you see the different hertz and the different patterns that you get with just slight changes. Right. And I mean, I don't want to bore anybody with that, but it's just there's something to it. There's something more to frequency than we've been told.
Look at that.
And the shape of these star forts has, and there's, this one's a cool video right here with the architecture of sound.
What you are looking at right now is not CGI or computer animation. It's simply a bowl of water with sound playing beneath. Cymatics is the science of revealing the architecture of sound. Here we have sand on a metal plate. If you change the frequency of the sound, you can see complex patterns forming. Zooming in even closer on these patterns, you can see what looks like galaxies. Mystic Hazrat Inayat Khan said, "Divine sound is the cause of all manifestation. The knower of the mystery of sound knows the mystery of the whole universe." It has also been said that sound is architecture frozen in time. But you may want to ask yourself, what type of physical architecture are you embedding into your subconscious with the music that you listen to? I want you to really, really think about
I love that point. Sound is frozen, is architecture frozen in time.
It is, because I mean, at the right frequency, buildings will shatter. You know this with a opera singer when they do the crystal glass thing and they shatter it because they match the frequency of the glass or the structure. What was I going to say? Oh, so we've talked about cymatics quite a bit on the show, actually. So this tie-in is absolutely perfect. And it's one of those things to where we've kind of talked about it when I had a guy named Ben Carroll on, an incredible musician. He does the singing bowl stuff, but absolutely fascinating. And we talked about cymatics as it relates to kind of vibrationally what we are all experiencing right now. And that discord from changing tones, almost like going out of a great age of deception, let's say, to an age of enlightenment on a spiritual level, then that dissonance could be the shakeup of the interim of in between switching to the new frequency. And so we've talked about cymatics a lot, man. So it's wonderful that you've tied this in.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and that's a lot of what is where my research is leading me, is down that frequency pattern, and there's something to it. And like you said, it ties in with the churches as well, or the cathedrals, and the different geometric shapes they use in their windows, and some of these tie and. I would love to see the map, like you're saying. I would love cathedrals and starforts, a map with all the different frequencies of the shapes and how it ties to a frequency. That would just be, I think that is a key that can really help us unlock some information as to how things used to work.
Yeah. And then when you talk about hertz and frequencies, this is another interesting thing. I'm grateful you brought it up, because the 440 down to 432, that changing of the standard tuning is something that really screws with everyone. And that's what he was saying in that video, was that, how does sound influence you? Just like you were talking about the water studies, same thing. It's how your body receives it and what it does to your body, these specific frequencies. And so that's when they, allegedly hijacked it and changed it to the 432 instead of 440. That's an issue. That's part of the reason we have, or what they say is part of the reason we have all the mind control and all the nonsense with our vibrations is through things like hijacking even the tuning of our music.
Yeah, and that 440 is supposedly, according to what the Nazis were studying, it puts you into a state of chaos, your body, whereas 432 is the natural frequency, and it's at peace, right? And so, one of the things I like to do is I'll like to listen on a 432 player. It doesn't work it's not the perfect thing. It's not the same as having it recorded at 432, but it's any little bit that you can help your body out. I'm trying to do it at this point, because we are just constantly bombarded, whether it's radio waves, different frequencies, good and bad. And that's the interesting thing. If you think about it, Brandon, think about all the frequencies we're pounded with now, and they may have been pounded with the same amount, just on the inverted side of it.
Yeah, something
positive. They were getting all the positive frequencies emanating out, all the healing frequencies, where we're getting all the cancerous and all the destructive, chaotic frequencies just bombarding us constantly.
Could not agree more. You just point out the best mystery of our time, man. I really do think that there is definitely some fuckery going on with our history, for sure. I think we can definitely all agree with that. But the way that you've laid out the information is unbelievably mind-blowing, brother. You do an awesome job, man.
Oh, I appreciate it. I love this stuff, and I'm OCD to the max. So once I get into something, I go even for the World Fair show, I have a bunch of different presentations, but I wanted to put together something for you, and it was like 150 slides, and it's like, man, come on, you could probably do it in 30, but I'm OCD, and I'm like, well, they have to see this building. No, they have to see that, because I want to give people the full picture. I don't want to be one of those people that, I'll go do it all yourself. I want to give you intrigue to go do it yourself.
Yeah. And like I said, you did an amazing job. I'm grateful for the pictures. It's so whimsical. I was caught up in it as it was going on. I was like, oh yeah, I'm doing a show right now.
Well, that's why I hate it, because, I was afraid that I was just talking too much, and I'm like, hey, I hope he interjects anytime. But I've had a couple people say that. They're like, no, I get mesmerized by the photos and the pictures, and I'm just like, I can't talk at that point.
it's all so well hand in hand. And then you as a presenter, again, just the way your mind works, man, it's absolutely brilliant. So, dude, I could talk to you about this forever, but let's cap it on this one this time, and then we would just look forward to this next time. Matt Terrillion, dude, absolutely amazing. Guys, his YouTube, his show will be linked down in the show notes. Make sure that you guys check him out. Matt, thank you so much for your time. Come back any damn time, brother.
Oh, Brandon, and I hope this is one of many. This is my pleasure. It was great talking with you, buddy.
Massive thanks to Matt for coming by and dropping that dope knowledge on us. Absolutely incredible. He does a wonderful job, guys. So make sure that you check the show notes for all the ways to find him and his amazing show, The Great Deception Podcast. Absolutely incredible. I'm a fan. Go check it out, guys. He does a phenomenal job. So linked down in the show notes as well is Food Forest Abundance if you want to get you all freedom from Feel On, as well as Libsyn if you'd like to start your own podcast. There's a couple of months free with that link. And then also, if you're going to run anything through Amazon, run it through our link. It helps the show for something you were going to do anyway, right? Okay, also, if you would like to expand your experience with us here, do so at expandingrealitypodcast.com, linked in the show notes. That's going to be a central hub for everything. Our Too Hot for YouTube stuff's over there. The videos are over there for free, the video interviews, as well as links to all socials, merchandise, all that good stuff, guys. The lives that we do on Rokfin are replayed there for free as well. So check that out. Cool resource, and go check it out. It's really, really cool. So go out into this beautifully mysterious place, and y'all just pick up a piece of litter. Of course, be nice to everybody that you come across. Hold doors, smile. It's no big deal, but it makes a massive ripple effect. Just like buying somebody a coffee or a meal in line around you. It's easy. It's, no big deal, but it makes a massive deal, right? The effort is nothing, but the ripple effect of the result of that effort are tremendous. So highly, highly recommend you guys take yourselves up on doing something like that, as well as get the hell out of the left-hand lane if you get somebody behind you wanting to pass. And then, of course, guys, go out into this beautifully mysterious place, whatever the hell it is, and y'all just be good to one another. Thank you so much for listening. We will see you next time.